Balloons. They are crazy. Some people see them and think that they're UFOs. Some people are quite terrified of them. The way they make that squeaky sound, the way they float about as though they have a mind of their own, and the way they pop with a loud sound. This fear has a name. Globophobia. And it may seem strange, it may often be irrational, but in the end, these flying globes really are dangerous and really should be feared, within reason, of course. Have there been animal balloons or plant balloons, wild balloons that just arose out of nature like worms or wolves, perhaps to hunt and kill, perhaps to cause natural disasters? Who knows? Nobody, because to our present knowledge there are no balloons in nature which were not made by human hands. Well, aside from maybe sea foam and the bubbles from the bubble bush. An argument could be made that those are in essence balloons, but their surfaces are made of liquid, so they never last very long before just disappearing. So how is it that nature is full of balloons, crowded with them even? Why are there far too many balloons threatening us from the sky? Well, because long before the era of airplanes and helicopters in some time forgotten, ancient humans invented high aerial technology for its use in hunting, ancient entertainments, and even in psychological warfare. What? Ancient high aerial technology? What am I talking about here? I'm talking ballistic missiles, I'm talking rockets, I'm talking kites, and I'm talking ancient balloons. People have been making them for quite possibly thousands of years, and they still make them today. Nowadays, they're much more sophisticated, they're much more common. They're still mysterious somehow. They crowd our skies, and they are a threat. Now, as I said, although there are some flying bubbles and foams in nature, which I discussed in a piece I did earlier this year, all about the majestic mysteries of sea foam, please check it out, there aren't any known flying balloons not produced by humans. There are flying insects, spores, seeds, microbes, birds, bats, and perhaps others, and surely many of these contain airtight hollow spaces within them full of gas. But as far as I know, none of these, except for foam, sustain flight by mostly containing gas. And there isn't even any known foam in nature that contains lighter than air gas that can actually sustain flight by being lighter than the air around it. I suppose sea foam could do this in theory if it absorbed enough heat. For example, if it was dark colored foam on a hot day, the expansion of the air inside would shorten the foam's lifespan, though. In any case, there's no way to tell for certain if this ever happens. And would it even be possible to call this a balloon? Now, there is something called ballooning spiders, and they do fly. In fact, the way that they fly is really interesting. They basically go up to a high place, stand on their tippy toes, and spin strands of silk called gossamer. And then these strands are carried up into the air by the difference between the electrical charge in the silk and that in the atmosphere. Either electrical charges or warm winds, or perhaps a combination of both, then carry the spiders away. This behavior is usually called ballooning, but it's also called kiting. Sometimes big groups of spiders do this en masse. In one instance, researchers in South Africa observed the ballooning of the African social spider. These spiders live together in big colonies, and females will go ballooning together. What's interesting is that these spiders, as well as other ballooning spiders, will actually spin multiple threads at once. These threads then spread out and basically turn into kites about a meter wide. It's notable that the spiders flew when it was warm out, so it's quite likely that these gossamer kites were actually carried upward in part by warm rising air, kind of like a balloon made of silk. But are they truly balloons? I don't think so, not quite. But they are associated with UFOs and flying saucers. An argument can be made that spiders and other silk producing little ones also produce bona fide Heinekian UFOs. In a report published in the journal Weather in 1949, a man named P.R. Bishop reported seeing strange star like spheres of light at Port Hope, Ontario. Viewed through binoculars, Bishop said he also saw strands of gossamer, and he guessed these shiny spheres were actually balls of gossamer thread. If he was right, then dang. What other weird bug stuff in the sky gets reported as UFOs? Big hat tip to Jeff Knox for that one. Gossamer also certainly results in reports of angel hair, the strange ectoplasm esque residue allegedly dropped by saucers. But in any case, yes, spiders do fly. They do it in big groups. It's really fantastic. And it's called ballooning. But no balloons. Now, as terrible a researcher as I am, I really want to research the topic of ancient balloons more at some point, because I found a lot of unreliable references online about stretchy inflatable balloons having been invented in the ancient world or even in prehistory. This is quite plausible since these simple balloons could have been made out of the organs of animals, such as pigs' bladders, but unfortunately, like I said, a lot of these sources appear to be unreliable. What I'm not finding are specific historical references to balloons of this type. But what I am finding are Reddit posts debunking some common and widely distributed claims. So I'm not even going to bother repeating those claims at this point, because as important as it is, I don't really like debunking. I like finding stuff that's both fantastic and true. For example, did you know that a flying nocturnal light was likely invented in China around 1700 years ago? Although nobody knows exactly when this flying device was first invented. Although nobody knows exactly when this flying device was first invented, it's thought to have been around the 3rd century CE. The device in question is called a sky lantern or a Kongming lantern because its invention is attributed to the military strategist named Zhuge Liang or Kongming. Legend has it that he used the sky lantern to confuse and frighten enemies. But a sky lantern is really simple. It's a lantern made of paper with a flame at the bottom of it. The flame heats up the air inside and causes the lantern to fly away. It's a literal, tiny hot air balloon. It's commonly thought these sky lanterns were used for sending signals in battle. And as we will find, even today the sky lantern poses a serious threat from the sky. Yet the earliest sky lanterns are truly shrouded in mystery. They're UFOs by dint of the fact that time has rendered them unidentified. The same can be said of many ancient flying machines. Now, animals' bladders were certainly in use as balloons at least by the 1600s. For example, in an experiment that was tested by the Accademia del Cimento in Florence, Italy, they used a deflated bladder of a lamb to measure air pressure inside of a tube. They did this by forcing the air out of the tube using mercury. This would then cause the deflated bladder to bulge. Excuse me if that explanation is inaccurate. Anyway, before everybody started using the rubber balloon, first invented by Michael Faraday in 1824, there were still balloons. Balloons were used as toys by kids, as well as for traditional yearly festivals. Only they were made from the bladders of pigs. And by bladders, I mean the organs that pigs store their pee inside of. Pigs' bladders were also used as the inner lining of rugby balls and footballs, which is in part where we get one of the worst words in the English language, pigskin. I know, it's all very, very disgusting, and I hate it, because not only is it disgusting, but it's really hard to say when or even if such balloons were ever filled with hot air or lighter than air gas. So, when did the bladders of animals first fly in the sky? The first urinary flying objects? It's a pea mystery. Another mystery I feel, as someone who is not an expert, is when the first humans themselves flew, using the floaty powers of balloons. But what we do know is that the first recorded and widely acknowledged free flight by humans in a hot air balloon was performed by Pilatre de Rosier and Marquis d'Arlande. Excuse my pronunciation. This was in Paris on November 21st, 1783. The balloon was designed by the brothers Joseph Michel and Jacques Etienne Montgolfier. This was not the first hot air balloon flight. The brothers conducted multiple previous test flights. For example, in one historic flight, they placed animal passengers aboard to test how they would react. The three passengers included a duck, a rooster, and a sheep. And that sheep's name was Mont au Ciel, which means climb to the sky. The Montgolfier brothers' balloon tests immediately incited the imagination of Europe and America in 1783, with news articles describing people's excitement and artists selling memorabilia decorated with balloons or commemorating important flights. Soon, more hot air balloon flights followed, and elaborate balloon flight hoaxes soon appeared in print too. In Connecticut in 1785, a man named Daniel Moore published a work with the full title, An Account of Count d'Artois and His Friend's Passage to the Moon in a Flying Machine called an Air Balloon, which was constructed in France and from which place they ascended, giving an account of the things or objects they had a view of in the passage, and likewise the circumstances of their landing in that planet, and conversing with the inhabitants, their languages, manners, religion, etc., with many other things very entertaining and well worth the attention of those who need it. At the same time the Montgolfiers launched their historic flights, the American Revolution was coming to an end, and the French Revolution was soon to follow. The latter was coupled with national anxieties rising into panics surrounding the purported gathering of rebel forces in 1789. According to historian of the French Revolution Georges Lefebvre, one French pastor asked his parishioners, quote, if their enemies had landed in balloons, unquote. But of course, people's excitement over balloons did not end with these revolutions. Edgar Allan Poe wrote two still very famous balloon hoaxes, the first being The Unparalleled Adventure of Hans Pfaall, published in 1835, which also involved a journey to the moon. And then in 1844 he published his story now known as just The Balloon Hoax. Unlike Hans Pfaall's trip to the moon, this story was quite a bit more plausible and convincing as a news story, while still being fantastic. It reports on the historic 3-day voyage of the airship Victoria across the Atlantic Ocean. As the 19th century proceeded, the public's imagination and fears surrounding balloons ebbed and flowed, but overall increased, and gave way to fantasies and panics surrounding airships. And what is an airship but a balloon that one can steer? Jules Verne published Robur the Conqueror in 1886, a science fiction novel recounting the exploits of a villain who wields his awe-inspiring airship, the Albatross, to kidnap a group of balloonists. In 1891, newspapers reported a rash of phantom steerable balloon sightings in Russian Poland, thought to be the flying machines of German invaders. Then, 5 years later, strange and fantastical sightings of airships, as well as yet more airship hoaxes, spread like wildfire across the western United States. In 1896 and 1897, these reports started on the West Coast and then spread out through the Midwest. This led to the first report of a crashed alien spacecraft and many of the other tropes and cultural phenoms that we associate with modern day flying saucer reports. If you're interested in this strange pre saucer era wave of airship sightings, be sure to check out my piece devoted to it in Ufos number 7. If the mid to late 20th century was the era of phantom flying saucers, then the 19th century and the first decades of the 20th were the era of phantom flying airships. And these airship sightings only continued in waves scattered throughout the globe in the following decades. At the same time, fantastical airships portrayed in popular film and media, such as the films of Georges Méliès and Edwin S. Porter, and the fantastical phantom airship reports only petered out sometime after World War I, when real German airships, the Zeppelins, conducted bomb raids on the UK in 1915 to 1917. And during the same time, airplanes were used for the first time in battle. In 1937, the infamous explosion of a Zeppelin airship called the Hindenburg in New Jersey served well to mark the end of the airship era. Lighter-than-air craft were soon viewed as largely impractical, and Zeppelins used for air travel were entirely supplanted by enormous passenger planes in the following decades. Yet even today, balloons are coupled to fears of foreign invaders, advanced secret technologies developed or investigated in secret, and even reported as UFOs. In early 2023, a Chinese spy balloon spent a week flying over US airspace before being shot down by an F-22 Raptor. In the second episode of the UFO Detox Hour, I reported on a 2022 video of an orb shot by a military drone somewhere in the Middle East. A group of independent researchers called Bellingcat, who investigated the so-called Middle East object, concluded that it was likely a regular Mylar party balloon. There is no shortage of other modern UFO sightings that either definitely were caused by balloons or else very well could have been, such as the famous Amaranth case that we talked about in UFO's chat on August 25th. In this case, from 1982, a cell biology student in France reported witnessing a flying saucer about the size and shape of a Mylar balloon descend on his garden, where it floated for a while and then took off. Though investigators at the time concluded this close encounter of the second kind could not be explained, a re-examination from the reliability of UFO witness testimony published last year concludes that what this witness saw was in fact very likely a Mylar balloon. Its movements could have easily been caused by changes in temperature and air pressure, and its apparent ability to levitate in one spot was likely just down to it resting on overgrown hollyhocks. As we discussed previously on UFO's chat, and as I will further support later, this quite fantastic explanation is not nearly as outlandish as it at first seems. Heck, even Roswell was balloons. Yes, you know that time when a flying saucer supposedly crashed on the ranch of Mac Brazel near Roswell, New Mexico in the summer of 1947, and then it was reported in newspapers only for the US Army Air Forces to quickly retract the story? Well, sorry buddies, that was definitely balloons, and not flying saucers. Specifically, it was the debris from a Project Mogul balloon train. These balloon trains were secretly being used by the US military to detect nuclear detonation tests by the Soviet Union. Yep, that's right. Even Roswell was balloons. So, what have we learned so far? The history of balloons is somewhat shrouded by time and mystery. Have animals or plants ever become wild balloonists? Are there tiny animal balloonists in the sky right now? Nobody knows for sure. There are ballooning spiders, but really they don't actually use balloons. They use kites made of gossamer, a subtle, albeit fantastical distinction. There's no clear evidence that actual ballooning animals or plants exist in our skies. However, at some point in ancient times, perhaps in prehistory among a group of cave people, someone somewhere decided to take the bladder of some poor animal and inflate it with air. The hypothetical first cave balloon. Perhaps at some point one of these cave balloons flew off into the sky. But flying balloons didn't really become popular, as far as we know, until around the 3rd century with the invention of the sky lantern. Already at this time, the hot air balloon was probably being used to inspire shock and awe at the battlefront. Then, beginning in 1783, the Western world's imagination came under the grip of balloonmania, when history recorded the first humans carried aloft by hot air balloons. Balloons became tied to the fantasies of a future driven by technological innovation, as well as fears of ballooning invaders from the skies. The hot air balloon led to the steerable balloon, the airship, and thus the modern UFO era did not begin in 1947. It really began sometime in the late 18th century, around the time of the French and American Revolutions. It then reached a fever pitch in 1896 and 1897 with the Great American Airship Wave. After airships went out of fashion during the first two world wars, phantom balloons and airships were supplanted by phantom flying saucers, but balloons still lived on in the shadow of the new saucer colossus. People still reported balloons as mysterious craft, either made by foreign adversaries or by aliens from another planet. Even Roswell was balloons, and indeed balloons still show up today in sky phantom reports, just as they did in olden times, both as a high-tech military threat and as a stimulus of UFO reports. Balloons still stoke our fears and provoke our imaginations just as they did in centuries past. It's just they do it more quietly now, as most people today are unaware of their true significance. The more things stay the same, the more they change. But there is one question I have not yet answered. Why are balloons a threat? Why are they not just a menace, but truly a massive danger lurking in our skies at every moment? Why are they so much more dangerous than they were in 1897 when everyone was talking about them? Were you expecting me to end on a cliffhanger? Yeah, I wasn't either. But be sure to tune in for part 2 of Balloons, a Flying Menace, on the next UFO Sunset.